Almighty. I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may convey His truth, be worthy of conveying His truth, and so sanctify His name, and bring peace to the world, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for taking of your time to listen to what we have to say. It's a very important issue. It's crucial. It's critical. It's the issue of Palestine, the occupation, the Nakba. So it's really critical to understand what the underlying factors are that brought this Nakba, how to be able to, with God's help, let's say, inshallah, remedy the situation. It can be remedied. It's not a lost situation because there is an almighty God, a compassionate God in the world, and there is, He's capable of everything. He will always brings good. What He does is good. Sometimes it's hidden, but we don't understand His ways. But we do believe, as every God-fearing person believes, that everything that God does is righteous and good. And eventually, the good appears, and we're able to look back and see what God wanted. We pray for that. We should understand the good in all His work. The evil will end. It says it in all the prayers. It says in all the books that God gives permission for the Satan sometimes to carry out its work, because if God wanted us to be created as angels, then He would have, but He didn't. He gave us the will to do good and bad, and we have to overcome the bad to do good. And that's the general rule of the world. But eventually it is overcome, and it says in the Torah that if you will, why are you rebelling against the word of God? It will not be successful. And so, in regard to the state of Israel, it's just one other. It's not just one other. It's a very, very bad and evil thing, an entity, and that we are certain that eventually it will end. It's clear, as with God's help, I will explain that according to Judaism, it has no basis for legitimacy. It's on the contrary, it is clearly forbidden in every aspect. This concept of occupation, this concept of the state of Israel, and therefore it would definitely will end. Just we pray, as many holy saints of ours, the chief rabbis of Palestine, and many other great people, we constantly urge us to pray that God should bring about the end of this occupation, the dismantlement of the state. It should happen soon in our days and peacefully, without any further suffering and bloodshed, which we unfortunately see that it is one continuous chain of suffering and bloodshed to the Palestinian people, obviously to the Arab and Muslim people, to the Arab Christian people, but also to the Jewish people. And in a certain manner, if you're from the Jewish religion, as we'll try to explain, it's not only a material Nakba, but it is for us the worst spiritual Nakba possible. It is uprooting Jews from God, clearly. It uproots Jews from their connection to God, from what it meant to be a Jew, to uproot the soul of what it means to be this covenant of what it means to be connected to God, and a transformation into a base nationalism that is just using the name Judaism as a trick, as a foil to create this heretic entity, a piece of land, a country. So with God's help, I'll just try to explain these issues, the difference between Judaism and Zionism, and that will give you, with God's help again, the opportunity that when you want to speak up for the people of Palestine, and people will look at you, whether they will speak openly or not, and they'll accuse you of being anti-Semitic, you will be strong enough, you'll have the backing to be able to say, excuse me, this is not only not anti-Semitism, what we're working here, but for Palestine, what we're speaking of for Palestine, but on the contrary, if it would be removed, this Zionist state of Israel, then it would be saving the Jewish people. It would stop this terrible animosity and endless river of bloodshed and the exacerbation of anti-Semitism throughout the world. With God's help, We need a lot of godly help to be able to, in such a short time, encompass and try to shed light on this terrible, on the issue of what this is, Zionism, what it's all about. It's over 60, it's like 68 years now, this occupation, almost 68 years, but it's not, it's much longer than 68 years. As you know, the Zionists came up to Palestine. It didn't start in 1948. The state was ratified in 1948. So to be able to explain, what we do is we try to shed a little light, and once you have that window, with God's help, you have where to look further into the subject. With God's help, what is Judaism? In order to understand what Zionism is and how they're trying to legitimize their work, we have to understand on what they're basing their occupation on, and that they're basing it on Judaism. And they use Jewish symbols, the Star of David. They use the menorah, the name Israel. Israel is actually the name of Jacob in the Bible. It says God called him Israel. It's my name personally also, Yisroel, Dovid. And so simply they've stolen the name and they've hijacked our identity, and they're using it to legitimize their creation of the state. So again, Judaism, the religion Judaism means subservience to God. It was a covenant that the Jewish people made with the Almighty around 3,000 years ago on Mount Sinai. We as Jewish people believe that the Almighty, He created the universe, and He wants and He requires of everybody to believe in Him and serve Him. And if you will serve Him, you don't have to be Jewish to serve Him. If you will keep it called the seven commandments of Noah, then you are righteous. You will inherit the world to come. It's clearly in our law books. It's clearly in the prophecies of Elijah the prophet and Tanakh Viejo. It says if you will keep the seven commandments of Noah, which is called the seven commandments of Noah because after there was the great flood, because people had sinned strongly, and God brought a flood to the world. And then afterwards, Noah remained with his wife and children, and we all are descendants of Noah. So he gave the commandments, 7 commandments, which is to believe in one God, not to serve idols, not to kill, not to steal, not to commit adultery, to have a law system in every country where you're residing. And the 7th is differences of opinion. Maimonides, who was from Egypt, Maimonides says that it is that even if an animal is slaughtered, if it's still shaking, you're not allowed to eat from it. Basically, if one keeps these 7 commandments, according to Jewish belief, they will inherit the world to come. Judaism was a covenant that we made on Mount Sinai to keep 613 commandments, the Torah. If we don't keep our commandments, then we're considered sinners. In other words, we have the laws of Sabbath and kosher and many, many other laws that we have to keep. Then God required of us to go to the Holy Land and to serve Him there. We believe God, it's like His garden or something that He built, that He wanted to build a temple there that was a place of a special holiness. And He required of us to go there, and if we uphold the laws properly, then we have a right to be there. But if we were not upholding the laws properly, then it is a very holy place. It is like a very sensitive place, then we will be rejected from the land. And the Jewish people were warned many times throughout the books, the prophecies, Isaiah, Ezekiel, all the prophecies, Jeremiah, that they're not up to par. In the time that they were there, there came a time that they were not continually serving God the way it was supposed to be, on this high level that is required in the Holy Land. Therefore, we will be sent into exile. We will be expelled from the land, as the body rejects something which is foreign. And that is what happened with the destruction of the temple. There was 2 temples, King Solomon's temple. That happened like 2,000 years ago. Around 1,000 years after the acceptance of the Torah. Now, when we went into exile, that was this 2,000-year period that we are still in, of exile, that we are dispersed amongst the nations. So Judaism didn't change when we were there in the Holy Land till today. From the time Moses went up on Mount Sinai, made the covenant of the Jewish people with God, that we should keep these commandments, or as God told us, you should be a nation of priests, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, that we have to continually be like priests, serving God throughout our lives. This remains the same. We're not allowed to change it one iota. It doesn't matter how great the individual is, how great a rabbi, how great a mystic, or whatever it is, it will not change. That is what's called today maybe Orthodox Jewry. Orthodox means that we uphold that. Any type of other presentation of Judaism or representation of Judaism, for instance, Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, by us it doesn't have any place. It's a false representation. You'll find the majority of Jews in the United States, unfortunately, are Reform, and yet they consider themselves proper and legitimate representatives of Judaism, that their voice is a legitimate voice, and they're recognized as such. In the United States, they have their temples and this and that, and they ordain rabbis, and they're looked at as a legitimate representation of Judaism. And they couldn't be anything further from the truth. Look in the Torah. What is the Torah? A covenant that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai that we have to uphold. How could there be something like that? Imagine if there would come some geniuses, and they would be Buddhists, and they would be very rich, and they would make great mosques, and they would say they represent Islam, or some atheists, or whatever you would like, and they make them a head of them, a sheikh and an imam, and everything you'd like. And they would ordain imams or whatever, however the system works, and they would start having representatives in the government and interfaith dialogues and all that. And you would say, "Are you guys crazy? Are we dreaming? This is not us. It doesn't make sense. Call yourself what you want, but don't call yourself Islam." So basically, that is the same thing. Reform is already around 200 years old. And they're very powerful. They're in the United States and all conservative Jews, and unfortunately today Zionism. But it doesn't change the facts one iota, one drop. 1 and 1 is 2. And all the people around the world will gather together with the strongest computers, and they'll say 1 and 1 is 3. The truth remains the same. Judaism is subservience to God, upholding the laws of the Torah. Our forefathers throughout the generations gave their lives for that. We're required to give our lives to uphold the Torah. We have specific laws on if somebody tries to force a person to serve idolatry, they have to let themselves be killed for that. We teach our children such, and it doesn't matter what name it's given, we're not allowed to stray from the words of the Torah. Yet Zionism came around 150 years ago, and it was another movement that tries to call themselves Judaism. What is Zionism? The word Zionism is Zion. The Z and Tzitz in the Torah would be referred to as Zion. And Zion means the city of David. It means basically Jerusalem. Therefore the people who had this ideology of Zionism to make a state of Israel, they refer to as Zionists. This movement was a movement that claimed that they have a right to go and take over this land, and they also claim not only they have the right, but they claim they're doing this as a godly issue. It's basically what it is a transformation from religion, from this covenant to God, the subservience to God, into a base nationalism, a material concept of having a piece of land, having a military, a militia, having Olympic teams and all the trappings of a country, so they can say the state of Israel, they have a national anthem, and they made a language, and we could speak about that a little bit also, but they're basically a nationalist movement. This, in and of itself, is contradictory to Judaism. Not contradictory and forbidden, extremely forbidden. Just as you understand pig is forbidden, this is forbidden, and maybe much more than pig. Why? Because in the Torah, we are a religion, we have to be subservient to God. And once we went into exile, we were put under oath by God. And this is in the prophecies of King Solomon, in the book called Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs of King Solomon, where he said God put us under 3 oaths and warned us. King Solomon was before the temple was destroyed. He built the temple, but we were put under oath. God foresaw our being driven into exile, and he warned us. One, we were put under oath not to return in mass, in large numbers to the Holy Land. We're forbidden to do that. Not even if you just want to gather together as in a mass return, we're not allowed to. Why? Because we were expelled by the Almighty. It's like you're taking a son who did something, who was a very big troublemaker, and the father puts him in the corner and says, stay there. And now he says he's not going to stay. He comes back. It's God's land, it's God's world, and he dispersed us amongst nations. We're not allowed to return en masse. Secondly, the second oath is we're not allowed to rebel against any nations. We have to be loyal citizens in every country we're residing, pray for the well-being of the country, and that is a requirement not to rebel against any nation. Thirdly, we're not allowed to make any attempts to end exile. These are 3 oaths of God to the Jewish people. So the concept of this Zionist movement that started 100-odd years ago, remember Judaism is thousands of years, and this is 100-odd years. It was created by these people who are mostly non-religious Jews. They didn't keep the 10 Commandments, the Sabbath, and so forth as a general rule. And their issue was to ignore the concepts of all the laws of the Torah. Their issue was that they're going to make a national home, try to gather together the masses of Jews, blatantly ignoring this oath of not to return en masse. And secondly, they call it aliyah. Maybe you heard the word, they should go up. And the second issue is they're rebelling against nations, they're rebelling against the people who are living there in Palestine. And thirdly, they're making every attempt to end exile. They call themselves clearly, they say they're the eschalta de geula, beginning of redemption. And so in every facet, it is contradictory to what Judaism is. Subservience to God, acceptance of God's rule, acceptance that He understands, He's compassionate, He's all compassionate, He knows what's good for us, even that looks, maybe the exile, our existence could be full of trials and tribulations. We just recently went through the Holocaust and so forth, but that does not give us a right to say, okay, God, we're not going to accept you anymore, we're going to do what we want. In fact, the essence of Zionism is rooted in a concept that is blasphemy and heresy. They simply say one of their issues, because they're full of these little parts, because it's all based on one thing, that they really don't believe in God, or they divorce themselves from God. But they say, where was God? This is a common mantra among Zionists. Where was God by the Holocaust? So we have to protect ourselves. In other words, what are they saying? That God can't protect us. So we're better. We're stronger. We're going to make it. Yet they put on this pious face, and they say, "Oh, we are returning to the land that God gave us, and we're going to now do God's will. And for 2,000 years we're in exile. We're going to return to the." So they're full of hypocrisy and contradictions. They're claiming that they're going to respect the words of God. Yet we know that it's blasphemy to consider that God is weak, that God does not rule the world. They said, where was God? We have no choice. We're going to take the guns in our own hands and protect us. So there's so many issues of their contradictions, of the falsehood. But in and of itself, when they just came up with this, sometimes people make mistakes, but when they came along with this concept of making a state, all the rabbinical authorities, Zionism started in Europe, not in Palestine. It started in Europe, in Austria. And all the rabbinical authorities, we have a book, the Rabbis Speak Out, all the rabbinical authorities universally said, excuse me, this is not acceptable. We've gone through the Inquisition, we've gone through the Crusades, we've gone through so much trials and tribulations. There was the opportunity for Jews to buy a piece of land and make their own country, their own settlement. Throughout history, there was a golden age of Judaism. But all the rabbis, when they were asked, should we try to attempt to do this? We have the responses of the many rabbis throughout history. And they all said, no, have patience. God is watching every individual, controlling their lives, protecting them, everything that is from God. The good that befalls man, the evil, the punishment that befalls man, everything is from God. There's a reason for everything. And when the time is right, He, in the blink of an eye, will bring the end of this exile, and we will be returned. And if you look at Jewish prayers, you can Google it, you can look, you'll find the Orthodox prayers, what the Reform says is just not Judaism, it's just nothing. But if you look in the Jewish religious text, you'll see all our prayers are replete with one issue, that we yearn our return to God's God's room, God's garden, that we yearn for the glorification of God. We believe the purpose in this world is for a person to do good, to do the will of the Almighty, and so we sanctify Him with our lives. That's all we talk about the sanctification of God through our existence. The ultimate of this, the pinnacle, is when the whole world will recognize one God. So we pray for this. It's the end of our prayers, the last verse of our prayers, every morning, every in the afternoon, there will be the day that God will be king over the whole world, and then God will be recognized. That's what we talk about, we yearn for from beginning to end. That's the purpose. Nothing else. Not that we should have some type of a rule, it should be a Jewish rule, it should be the revelation of God where all humanity will recognize Him. That is what the end of exile, what we yearn for. The concept of creating this state is totally strange to this, and it's antithetical. It has nothing to do with this. It's nothing. We're not yearning for a piece of land. It's falsely explaining what Judaism is. And as I say, so the concept of Zionism, that they're going to make a state, is rooted in blasphemy, in heresy. Where was God? We have an insurance policy. We have a piece of land to protect us. God protects you. God always, that's what your forefathers and everybody believed in God, nothing else, not in a gun. And then it's when it comes to in its active state, it breaches these three oaths of returning en masse, rebelling against nations, and going against the command that we should remain in exile. On top of that, this concept of a state of Israel was made not in a land that was uninhabited. If it would have been created in where one of the plans they wanted to make it in Uganda, because remember, these are not religious guys, the Hertz and all. These guys were just looking for nationalism. They wanted to make it in Patagonia next to Argentina. They wanted to make it in Uganda. But when they finally decided, and they had a meeting in a conference in 1890s in Basel, Switzerland, where they decided to make it in Palestine, because for practical reasons that they'll be able to get backing from the world, because like they say, they'll turn to the world and say, hey, we're doing God's will. They knew that is the way they'll be able to ensnare many Jews who don't know the Torah that well, and they'll get money support, and they'll go to the Christians, the evangelistic Christians, as you know that there are more of them than there are Jews who are supporting the state of Israel blindly. And they knew that's where they'll be able to get back. That's why they turned to Palestine, practical persons. But when they went to Palestine, even if it would have been uninhabited, it would have been a land totally void of human beings. We as a Jewish people would have been required to be in total opposition to the creation of this state. We would have been, and we of course are against the state, but it wouldn't really change the picture if it would have been an uninhabited land, because Jews are in exile. And they're rebelling against God, that we're not allowed to make a state. The fact that they went to Palestine, and it was inhabited by mostly Muslim people, and then there was a Christian Arab society, and there was a Jewish community, being that they went there, and in order to create a state, they threw out the people that were there, they oppressed them, they took over the land. So now they're breaching all the other laws of the Torah about the issue of not to kill, not to steal, and everything that the Torah is, what the Torah is about, this covenant that we made to God, that you're not allowed to kill and steal, and so forth. So therefore, in every facet, this state of Israel is totally antithetical to Judaism. It's not Judaism. It's something the diametric opposite of what Judaism is. Yet, they're running around, they're waving the Jewish symbols, the Star of David that they put on their flag. They're calling themselves the State of Israel. The Jewish state, you have to be careful, they like to be referred to as the Jewish state, and everybody supports them as a Jewish state. So we are here as the voice of Jews who will remain true to our Torah, to our covenant with God, and we are here to tell you that when you get up there, when you want to speak about Palestine, know that you are facing a bunch of not only criminals, but con artists, You're facing a people, this whole concept, this whole group was made by a criminal entity, a false entity, and they really have no name, no legitimacy in what they're presenting themselves. It's like the Madoff scheme. It's an empty shell. There's nothing there. Yet they have the power. They have power. There was a time that Madoff had power. There was a time that apartheid was strong. There was a time that USSR was very strong, and if somebody dared to serve God, was sent to Siberia. There is these things, and they're recognized and they're given respect. You go to the United Nations when there was South Africa in its heydays, and it was recognized as a state. And if somebody spoke up against it, was a terrorist. If somebody, Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, listed as a terrorist. If somebody spoke up against apartheid, whenever they came off the plane, the president would come off a plane to visiting country. He would be given the Royal Guard, the treatment. There would be blowing of horns and everything, and everybody giving them the greatest respect. And if you ask somebody, I don't understand. They're taking a black person and they're saying because God gave him black skin, he has to sit in the back of the bus. And he has to live in the what's it called? The different areas that they have, and they're treating people like animals. How could you accept such a thing? Yet they're given the greatest respect, and this was for many years. But that is the facts of life. So don't be flustered because of that. You see, the world refers to them as a Jewish state and gives them legitimacy because of this. It's nothing to do with the truth. It isn't Jewish. It is a rebellion against God. Thank God, as one of our great rabbis always likes to say, even if the whole world, it says about Abraham, recognized the one God. The whole world didn't. Maimonides speaks about this. He says that it says in the Torah, Echad HaYavram, Abraham was one. Imagine that. He was living, let's say here in America, let's just give an example so we can picture it. A young child comes along and he says, you're all wrong, everybody's wrong, and he comes along with the belief. Everybody, God forbid, would be serving idols. They would be serving a piece of wood. Like it says in the prophecies, a person would bring home a piece of wood, he would split it in half. Half he would put into the fire to keep himself warm, he would burn it, and the other half he would bow down to it. Says in the prophecy, speaks about that. But that's the way it was in the time of Abraham. And he stood up, he said, this doesn't make sense. There's somebody who makes the world, the wood gets burnt, and he went through, the sun goes down, and he recognized the one God. But he was one, and he went against the whole world, but he was speaking truth. The truth will never change. Even if, God forbid, all Jews, God forbid, would drop their covenant to God and become Zionists, it would not change the fact that Zionism is totally forbidden. Occupation is totally forbidden. The fact is, thank God, that we do have large communities. We have communities that never was swayed from the belief in God and their opposition to Zionism, whether it is in Palestine, whether it is in Al-Quds. We have large communities. We have pictures of these communities. It's not we don't go around taking pictures. It happens to be against our religion in a certain manner. It's not like eating pig, but we don't. It's frowned upon, but we do have pictures of it by demonstrations or gatherings, large gatherings. This is when they took up the chief rabbi in Jerusalem of the anti-Zionists. Because the Zionists, again, to create this facade, they made a rabbinate, and they have a chief rabbi who they took up. Everything just a facade, just like they're using the name Judaism. So they made a rabbinate. Of course, everything is really a farce, and I'll explain a little bit, but we have hundreds of thousands of Jews living there in Palestine, in occupied Palestine, hundreds of thousands of Jews around the world, everywhere invariably there's a very religious community. The more religious, the more anti-Zionist. That's part of the Nakba, the tragedy, that people think the more religious a Jew, the more he supports the state of Israel. And people will always come over to me and say, Shalom, in the airport, Shalom, I support Israel. What am I supposed to say? I'm standing there with my luggage and come on. But this is what you find, it's very common. And it's totally not so. The more religious, invariably, the less supportive they'll be of the state, and the more opposing the state of Israel they will be. I always giving the example that I should mentioned before that when you come to our area next to Manhattan, right across from Manhattan. Manhattan is an island that's connected by bridges. The Williamsburg Bridge And the Jewish, there's no tolls on the Williams, by the way. The George Washington, there's a toll if you go through Williamsburg. You go to right across from Manhattan, you come and you go off the bridge. You make a right, that's Williamsburg. You're stepping back in time because the women dress modestly, the men most have beards and they dress hats and everything. It's a Jewish community, very large, thank God. The largest concentration of religious Jews. You go through there, you won't find one Israeli flag, blocks and blocks. Thank God it's going till Bed-Stuy, whatever further. The Jewish community is spreading and spreading and spreading, and there's not one Israeli flag. And the reason for this is because they're Jewish. Because they're Jewish, we oppose the state of Israel. And it's very intriguing. I mean, somebody who keeps on supporting the state of Israel should be asking themselves, how come in this community where they give their lives to keep their religion, and we're not permitted family planning, so the average family is maybe 7 children or something like that, and now we get married young with God's help, and we have large families. There's no such thing as public school amongst us. We send separate boys' schools and girls' schools, and the children, we have to pay for this education. And most of the people, it's called the people of the book, we send them to become scholars and rabbis, and most of them are not in the professional fields, they're not, so it's a poorer communities, and yet everybody, every single child, nobody gets left out. Every child goes to private schools. Imagine a parent has to put through 7 children, 12 children, and it's common, don't think it isn't, through private education, with all the other issues that go. Sometimes they have private tutoring, which is, many children have to have private tutoring. Almost every child needs a little extra. It's all paid for by the parents and by the community. And so they give their lives for this, for paying for kosher food, for everything. Yet, if it will be so critical and so important to have a state of Israel, so why aren't they, for everything they're doing, and all of a sudden comes to the state of Israel and they're not there? There must be a reason. Something is wrong, right? Something is wrong. It's such an important, integral part of religion, of Judaism. Why aren't they supporting it? We pay for other issues I just mentioned. We have called Hatzalah. Maybe you've heard of Hatzalah. I'm sure they have it here in the Jewish communities, whatever. It's an ambulatory service. You call them, many people join as members. It's for free, it's voluntary, and people pay, and they make campaigns for this, that if God forbid anybody needs an ambulance in a second, it never costs money, and you have ambulances there. They have Bikur Cholim visiting the sick in the hospitals. That people go around. I don't know if you have in here, but I'm sure there's a Bikur Cholim. Bikur means visiting Cholim, the sick, in hospitals. That Jewish people go around from hospital to hospital. They bring people, there's buses that take people to visit the sick, and they go around from bed to bed, and they ask them, do you need kosher food? Free, everything is free. And the major hospitals, I'm sure they have it here, they even have a Jewish room where they have kosher food there, set up every day. This is all, and it was started in our communities, in the non-Zionist communities, the anti-Zionist communities. Hatzalah was started by us, and by, I'm not saying the Turek, by the anti-Zionist communities. And yet, the state of Israel, we oppose. So is it because we are self-hating Jews? We are inhumane? Obviously, that's not the issue in being inhumane, because we give of our lives to help others. The issue is because it's being inhumane to support the state of Israel. The state of Israel is a direct rebellion against God, and it says in the Torah, if you will rebel against God, it will bring to catastrophe. God forbid it. So the concept of this state is by us, because we're Jews, we oppose it. We as Jews were accepted, were embraced in the Muslim world, throughout the Muslim countries, for hundreds and hundreds of years. There was the Crusades, there was the Inquisition, there was times that everybody knows about, but there were many times in between that Jews suffered in Europe. And where did they go? They turned to the Muslim countries, and they were accepted, they were embraced. They went, they grew there, they flourished as distinctly religious Jewish communities. In other words, they practiced openly their religion, and they weren't massacred because of that. There was no United Nations or human rights groups to send observers there. No such thing. Yet we were not massacred. Were there sometimes bumps in the road? The Zionists always like to point out, to disqualify and muddle the waters and everything. Yes, there was. Unfortunately, Human beings are human beings. They don't represent their religion all the time. And a lot of times they justify to do evil. And they do evil, people. And they don't accept others. There is these facts. And there were tribes and troubles. But as a general rule, the Jews, the history attests to this. We flourished in every Muslim and Arab land. As distinctly a different religion, we have a different religion, Judaism from Islam. We serve God, the one God. But this was never an impediment of coexistence, of respecting one another. We coexisted, we were helped and sustained by these Muslim and Arab lands. The requirement of God is that one has to show appreciation, gratitude, and repay good when good is done to you. That's another requirement of the Torah. It's a very strong requirement. By the 10 plagues, when God sent Moses to bring the 10 plagues to Egypt, Moses and Aaron, his brother Aaron. So it says God said to the first plague with Moses, God told Moses that he should smite the water with his staff, it should turn to blood. Moses said, I can't. He said, the water protected me. When Pharaoh decided to bathe in the blood of Jewish children, and they killed every Jewish boy that was born, his sister and mother took him and hid him in a wicker basket amongst the reeds. He said, how can I now turn and smite the water? Every child in the Judaism goes to school and learns the basic stories of the Torah. And he knows this story. And he's taught that you have to show gratitude for good done to you. In our schools, they know that the Muslim and Arab countries protected us and respected us. And our scholars come from, Maimonides comes from Egypt. We know all of this. So how dare the Zionists come today because, for their convenience, because they want to create their national home, because they hated their religion, and they decided to transform it into a nationalism. How dare they turn around and say, the world support us, and the ones who don't want us here in Palestine, it's because they're Muslims and they hate Jews. And therefore, we have a right, they're all evil, and they're villains, and we have a right to throw them out. That's unacceptable. That's by us humiliating, there's no word, this is a Nakba. And therefore, in our communities, we cry, we suffer, we feel the pain of the Palestinian people. When I have rabbis there was an older gentleman, I think he was in the security, who was wearing something, he's from Palestine, he was maybe 2 in 1948. But I have rabbis who were much older than that. And they remember, God should give them long years, and they remembered, in fact, one who was part of our group came to demonstrations many times with us. He was just passed away 2 years ago. That's Rabbi Cohen. A lot of times we have some clips of his. He remembers, he lived in the old city of Jerusalem. And he spoke about constantly how they lived together. They lived in the same courtyards. The Jews babysat the Muslim children. The Muslim parents, when the Jews had to go to pray, they would babysit the Jewish children. This is our most precious entity. The most precious thing that a person has is his children, and they trusted them. They entrusted them with their Muslim neighbors. Why not? I mean, if you would say, I trust myself I gave my neighbor my child to babysit, you said, what's the big thing? You wouldn't think about it twice. But today you have to say, that they entrusted their children, because that is a given. They were neighbors, they lived in the same courtyards, they had a difference of religion, a distinct difference. That was no impediment or draw back from living in peace. And now, to come and sit with one broad stroke of the brush, a sweep of the brush, and give a claim, now the Muslims have an ingrained hate to Jews. That's evil. And this is totally not true. It's trying to confuse people that they should believe, create a mantra, create a narrative that the conflict here is a religious conflict between Jews and Muslims, and that the world should support them, because the world today claims they have the United Nations and the U.S. They say it's a democracy, and they frown and they look and of course they think it's a terrible issue. Today everybody understands that if you won't accept another person because he's practicing a different religion is wrong. So therefore they say, so they get the world support, because yes, it's obvious the Palestinian people don't want to accept the Jews, the Jewish state. So therefore, with God's help, we're here to show that this is a farce, it's a ploy, this is a ploy of Zionism. Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. It is our greatest enemy. It is the greatest enemy of the Jewish people because it's a blatant rebellion against God in every facet, and when they're standing there and in order to glean support, they're not a Jewish state. They have no right to use the name Jewish state, and they're thieves when they're doing this. And when they're talking to the American people and the people throughout the world, and they say, support us because this is a religious conflict, and you don't want to accept this unacceptance of another people, you should know that it is false and speak up about it. We have pictures. If you go to our site, NKUSA, there's links to other sites. You will see that Jews are brutally beaten, constantly. Jews are brutally beaten for standing up and telling the world, we're never armed, we're never militant. It's not part of our Judaism to be militant. And Jews get brutally beaten simply because they go out and they stand up and they say, Judaism is not Zionism, that they have no right to speak in our name. They stand up and Zionists they have no respect. They have no respect for God or God's laws. That is why they're able to do something which is immoral. They're able to use our name because you won't do something which is immoral, to steal somebody's identity, to do something, because you reckon with what your measuring is done according to what God considers to steal, to kill, and what's right and what's wrong. But they don't have this morality issue because they do whatever they whim, whatever follows, whatever they want to, because they don't have godliness. So they go and they have this, they take over this land, they brutally beat Jews since day one, since they started their movement. They've assassinated our rabbis, our representatives. We have now the links in our site. You can see since in the 1920s we had a person who was a very great leader. He was a diplomat. He came from Denmark. His name was Dr. Dahan. His name should be avenged. His blood should be avenged. He stood up and he said he's going to represent the Jewish community. He was very well. He was knowledgeable on how to use the diplomatic fields and go around the world. He arranged that the chief rabbi of Palestine should meet with the king Faisal of Iraq and the king of Transjordan, the King Abdullah, and all these people, to show that the Jewish community is not under Zionism, because Zionism came well before the state was created in 1948. In the beginning of the 20th century, they started taking over the land. And the Jews felt threatened. They saw them being threatened by this fact that the Zionists are coming in their name. So he came because the Jews didn't know how to handle the situation. He came along with Dr. Dahan and he started arranging meetings with the king of Transjordan and so forth. And they gave over messages. We have the letters. We have a book called the Traditional Torah Opposition to Zionism. And in this book we have many of the quotes, many of the documents, and here you have the documents of this Rabbi Sonnenfeld of blessed memory. He was at the time, in the 1920s, the chief rabbi, and you have the meetings that he had. This is to the King Hussein of the Hejaz, and the others, where he met with them and gave over a letter of loyalty from the Jewish community. You have then afterwards, this is the picture of Dr. Dahan when he was in July 1st, 1924. He was cold-bloodedly assassinated on the steps of Shaare Zedek Hospital in Jerusalem. The Haganah, that's the terrorist group that today is called the IDF, they warned him. They said, because he was non-practicing Jew originally, and he thought to be a good Jew meant to move to Palestine and join the Zionists. That's how he ended up, left Denmark and went to Jerusalem. But he was a very serious person. So when he came to Jerusalem, and he was searching for the truth, and he spent some time with the Zionists, but then he started mingling in the streets of Jerusalem, and it didn't take long for him to realize that the real Jewish community is the scholars, is the religious Jews. And at that time, the chief rabbi was Rabbi Sonnenfeld. He met with Rabbi Sonnenfeld, and he said, look, I'm going to help you get your voice heard. And he made these connections. In fact, he was supposed to go to Parliament in Britain and represent the Jews in Parliament. And when and Haganah warned him, if you're not going to cease and desist, we're going to assassinate you, and they killed him. They killed him openly, and it's in their records on the streets of Jerusalem. The Jewish people, but continued until today, stood up and demonstrated, even though it cost us our lives. We stood up and demonstrated constantly against the occupation. We do constantly in Jerusalem. You can see the pictures. We have books, as I mentioned, of Jews being brutally beaten in Jerusalem. And it's gone. Nobody writes about this, but this is an ongoing phenomenon. There's almost not a teenager who goes through his teenage years who hasn't been in jail, arrested, beaten, and this, of course, accomplishes for them that it silences, it intimidates many, many people. You would have tens of thousands of people like us coming out constantly against the state in occupied Palestine, in the Holy Land, or in the United States. But we are attacked constantly. We're threatened. My children's lives are threatened. Our synagogues are attacked. My car, I go out, I find flat tires. I have a rabbi in Manchester, England, Rabbi Cohen, a very famous, one of our speakers. His windows, they shot into his house. His windows, he's been attacked. His cars, maybe almost 100 times his tires were cut. When he goes out to his car, he finds his tires cut. The police already put up some eyes around his house, yet they never once caught anybody. Mind you, this is going on for years. Something is funny, but I don't know. I'm just telling you a fact. So people see that though, and people are intimidated. They're afraid to speak up. In our communities, thank God, we have tens of thousands of people here. You can see, again, outside, in front of the White House, you have tens of thousands of Jews. When Netanyahu came to visit President Obama, the Jews went out and demonstrated. It was never reported in the local papers. But the pictures are there, the videos are there. Sometimes you'll have Al Jazeera television and others like that, Arab televisions, will report on this. And Press TV reports it because they're trying to show the national. So you'll have Arab media will come. Why isn't it reported? Because some of it, a lot of it is under conglomerates that are Zionist control, Zionist connection, part ownership or ownership. Some is blatantly opened by the Zionists. I know Daily News and a few others is opened by somebody Zuckerman, a head of a Zionist organization. And a lot of them they have called Media Watch, that they intimidate. If somebody dares, they watch media. If they start seeing too many times something that's sympathetic to Palestinian issues or coverage of us or something, then they warn them. They let them know that they're going to get shut down. It's very simple. They call the advertisers. They have people sit and call advertisers and say, you're not going to advertise there because you're going to lose this business and that business. Everybody's intertwined. Businesses have manufacturers and companies that you buy from. When we go out and demonstrate, tens of thousands of people, as I was showing you, yet when we go demonstrate, they come. The Zionists come. As they were last night in the university, people come with video cameras. They take every word. They watch every person that's there. And then they go and they stand there and they check. They look through every person. Oh, this guy was there. Oh, he works for this and this firm. Very good. They call up the firm and they say, listen, you have this guy working for you. And he's a Jew hater. He's a self-hating Jew. How could you have such a person? I mean, you understand that you want to do business with our corporation. How can you do business? So we're going to contact this and this manufacturer that you're getting your goods from. And it doesn't take long for the guy, the owner of the business says, look, what do I need this problem? He calls him and he says, if I ever see you again going there, I'm just going to have to, dismiss you. And this is an ongoing thing. This happens every time you have a demonstration. People lose their jobs. So people are fearful of being outspoken. In our communities, as I said, we have larger communities insulated. We're able to go out more, relatively more. In other communities around the United States, like here in California, we have colleagues there, we have people who study in our schools and so on, but they're afraid to be outspoken. So understand that we as Jews want you to know that the Jewish people around the world, we suffer, we feel with the Palestinians. We pray every day to God for the end of this evil, of this occupation. It's totally evil. The people of Palestine are the victims, not the villains. And they don't have to recognize the existence of the State of Israel, which America and everybody says, why don't they recognize the State of Israel? You said that?
Sorry, I didn't mean to keep standing here, but
Right.
it's 15 minutes left. I just want to see if anybody has questions.
Right, yeah, okay, let me just finish this.
Yeah,
So the people around, the people of Palestine are victims there, and we have people around the world from the Jewish community. Some of them will go out and speak. We want you to know that we cry with you, we feel with you, we pray, and we urge everybody, because ultimately in His hand is what will happen. Just like the USSR overnight, it went. The apartheid, and people say, how could that be? How could it happen? Nobody would have believed prior to end that it could. But everything is in God's hand, and evil will end. So we urge everybody to pray for this. Now, at the same time, we do that. At the same time, we urge everybody, and we try to stand up and speak up for the people of Palestine. And somebody will say to you, you're getting involved in a religious conflict, say, no, this is not a Jewish state. Don't refer to it as a Jewish state. That's a ploy of Zionism, because they want you to automatically get pictured as an anti-Semite. It's a Zionist. They insist it's called a Jewish state. It's not. It's a Zionist state. The diametric opposites, Judaism and Zionism. And don't be intimidated. Tell them, excuse me, we are anti-Semitic. You are. It's not really to argue with them, because mostly you won't get anywhere. These people are fortunately, they're brainwashed already, and they use different points. But one thing is certain: you can tell people for Judaism, it's the worst cancer. This state of Israel, the cause of bloodshed. The Jews are dying, not only the Palestinians. I'm not even talking about the Jews that they're constantly getting brutally beaten and oppressed in Palestine. But Jews around the world are subjected to hate, and people, because of the actions of the Zionists. So that the greatest exacerbator of anti-Semitism, because of a selfish ideology, a relatively new ideology called Zionism. It's a nationalist movement. It's only 100-odd years. Judaism is thousands of years. We suffered, we gave our lives to our religion, and all of a sudden, because Theodor Herzl and these guys came along and decided they want a nationalist movement, we have to pay. Jews around the world have to pay. There's an endless river of bloodshed of Palestinian and Jews. How could you say that it's anti-Semitic to stand up? On the contrary, if we could educate people and they would stop this occupation, that would be the cessation of would end this anti-Semitism. So Zionism, their hands are covered in blood. They are anti-Semitic, and to stand up is what is right. So stand up for the people of Gaza. They don't have the people of Palestine. They don't have proper food. Everybody is maimed. The children, they're emotionally scarred. Everyone. We have to stand up for them and not be silent, and don't be intimidated. Understand and speak up. And with God's help, we also ask people, if you know of places that we can go, conferences or whatever, or things that are happening, let us know. And we try to join. Let us know and spread the word, what we're doing. Let's spread it through Facebook, to whatever. Let people know that there are Jews in Palestine and around the world that we suffer with, we feel, we stand in sympathy and together with the Palestinian people. And we pray every day for the God help with His compassion to bring the speedy and peaceful dismantlement of the state of Israel, and ultimately for the day when all humanity will recognize the one God and serve Him in harmony.
Thank you for that talk, Rabbi. Is there Karim?
Curious.